thereabouts 9:30. The kids are put to bed, and guess what? It's the WPIAL Blitz show. I'm Bruce Badgley along with Ian McMeans, and wow, it's the best time of the year.
It is. The playoff brackets got released on Saturday. The regular season came to a conclusion, actually Saturday night, because there was one game that took place after the brackets were released, but it didn't really impact the brackets at all. But we're here. It's playoff time. It's exciting. We're a few weeks away from crowning WPIAL champions. So it's been a whirlwind week since we did our show last Monday. I did a couple guest spots for John at PA Today Sports, a friend of the show. He's been on our show a few times, so I did a little spot on his show. I was on the KDKA radio postgame show on Friday night, so that was a lot of fun. Thanks to anyone who tuned in to listen to me and Carlo Zovko, the WPIAL insider, break down all the scores and results and playoff clinchings. And now we've got brackets, and here we go.
Yeah, brackets and these state rankings. Hopefully we've got did you put the hopefully you put together the power rankings that you put together, your proprietary formula, right? That
Yes.
runs the state of Pennsylvania football, huh?
I do. We've got that. We've got the playoff brackets. So let's jump into it
Let's
because
get started.
we've got a big show tonight. There's a lot we've got to cover. So thanks everyone for joining us. If you have tuned in, you've obviously found us on YouTube, which is the sole home of the WPIAL Blitz Show. You can check us out on our social media channels. Been using Facebook a little more. We're always on Twitter. Don't really use Instagram, but it's still there. And check out steelcityblitz.com where I've got I had my WPIAL standings page throughout the season, had all the playoff bracketology breakdowns, playoff clinching scenarios, and we'll have game by game previews for all 6 classifications as they move through the playoffs and we get on to the WPIAL championship. So before we get started with talking about the brackets and the playoffs and all that, let's just do a quick recap of week
Yeah.
9 and what happened. There were a lot of big games this week, a lot of conference titles on the line, a lot of games to decide who got into the playoffs. So the biggest win were Norwin beating Mount Lebanon 14-7. They clinched not only a playoff spot for the first time since 2017, but also the number 3 seed in the 6A playoffs, which is
Wow.
huge because I'll skip ahead. North Allegheny reeling after their loss to Pine Richland. Last week we talked about, is there blood in the water? Well, they went out and lost to Seneca Valley, who was tied for last place in the conference.
Incredible. I saw that was the say what game to me in the state of Pennsylvania last week. Was say what? North Allegheny lost?
Yeah, and we were sitting there doing the post game show, and not all the games were final. Some of the scores were coming in, and I saw the score, and it hadn't gone final yet. I was like, Seneca Valley's beating North Allegheny. Like, can you believe this? Like, what is happening? And then they held on to clinch it. Like, that was just a wild result. And now North Allegheny losing 2 in a row. They're definitely reeling heading into the playoffs and get a Norwin team who's pretty hot and looking for potentially their first trip to the WPIAL championship in school history. But I get ahead of myself. We'll talk more
That's
about that
okay.
when we
That's
get
all
into the
right. We don't
brackets. But
mind.
but that's
It's our show. We can do what we want, right?
that's true. That's true. But that is why it's such a big result because of all the context too. Plum beat Penn Hills in a game that decided 4th place in the 5A Northeast Conference and pretty much the last one of the last wild cards into the field in 5A. Did you see the highlights of how this game ended?
I personally did not.
Okay. This is one of the craziest endings I think I've ever seen. So Plum, it was tied 14-14. Plum drove it down the field, got down inside the 5-yard line, couldn't punch it into the end zone. So they line up to kick a field goal, but with like 2 seconds left. Penn Hills gets a free rusher. They block the field goal attempt. The kicker scoops it up and starts running, and his linemen basically surround him and push him into the end zone for a game-winning touchdown as time expired. Which, like, what a crazy ending, right? Your field goal gets blocked, and then your kicker scoops it up, and the whole team basically carries them into the end zone.
Wow.
It was like
Well,
it was like watching a rugby scrum in there, right? Like once he started running, the line all just like kind of rugby scrummed him into the end zone.
since you talked about that game, when we get to the state rankings, before we close it out, I'll give you the wild ending that I had to our regular season broadcasts on PennLive, which you're just going to shake your head at too. So we'll wait for that till the end then.
Yeah. So congratulations to Plum getting that win and getting into the playoffs. Montour beat West Allegheny in the 4A Parkway Conference, which took West Allegheny from first place in the conference on tiebreakers heading into week 9 to fourth place and out of the playoffs this week. So because of the very limited 4A playoff field, only the top 2 were guaranteed spots, and they fell all the way to fourth place, and there wasn't enough wild card spots for them to get in. So West Allegheny out of the playoffs. Montour finishes
Unbelievable.
tied for the conference title with Newcastle. Seton LaSalle beat Washington in a head-to-head game for the 2A Century Conference title. Laurel topped Neshannock in a Lawrence County rivalry game that decided the 1A Big 7 conference title. And then California, after an early scare from Jefferson Morgan, stormed away in the second half to win the Tri-County South Conference title in 1A. The game of the week, Elwood City came back from a big halftime deficit to beat Beaver Falls on a fourth quarter touchdown. So congratulations, Elwood City. Both of those teams did get into the playoffs. So nice bounce back for Beaver Falls as well after going winless last year. 3 big upsets. We already talked about the Seneca Valley one. Steel Valley, who was kind of sitting in the middle of the pack in 2A, went out and beat the only unbeaten 2A team that was left, South Allegheny, by 21 points. I think it may not have been so much of an upset that I knew Steel Valley was a good team, but it was an upset by the margin. That Steel Valley
Sure.
beating undefeated South Allegheny by 21 points was certainly a huge eye opener.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And before we get too far away from it there, the shock and awe of being in the playoffs and then being out of the playoffs so precipitously, um, had to be just crazy there for West Allegheny.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, they went out and beat Newcastle to put themselves ahead of Newcastle in the conference standings with the tiebreakers, and then lost to Montour that then knocked them all the way out.
That's
So,
crazy.
and I think really the deciding factor in them missing out was they lost a non-conference game early in the year to Chartiers Valley head to head, and that was back in non-conference play when
Wow.
we were talking about all those results, right? Like Char Valley finished third in their conference, and West Allegheny was fourth in theirs, and they picked Char Valley because they beat them head to head. And that was a game where Char Valley went for 2 in overtime and got it and won the game on a 2-point conversion. So, kind of wild that that's basically the one play that kept West Allegheny out of the playoffs. And then the other upset of the week, Greensburg Central Catholic, who was basically stuck in a 3-way tie near the bottom of the 1A Eastern Conference, went out and beat Leechburg, who was in second place in the conference, handily by 29 points to put themselves into the playoffs with a wild card. And we'll talk more about that game in a minute. And another noteworthy result in the 3A Western Hills Conference, North Catholic beat Hopewell in an absolute shootout, just back and forth all night. North Catholic getting the final guaranteed playoff spot there, but Hopewell also got it.
Yeah, and we also want to give kudos out there to Gary Mullen in the live chat. He's got maybe the live chat of the year out there, and chime in, everybody. There's questions and everything else. Gary, thanks for chiming in. Everybody, check out Gary's note in the live chat there, and we'll let the Gary kind of live on that one. That was very good, Gary.
Now I have to check it out to see what he said. So,
Yeah, see, right, and that's the reason why I'm driving everybody to the live chat.
yeah.
It's there for a reason, to make comments, to answer questions. We're the only podcast out there that like this, that has the give and take. So, and that's the reason why we do it live, even though it's at 9:30 after the kids are to bed on Monday night, competing against Monday Night Football, which typically isn't a good game anyway. Uh,
So Gary does make a good point, and Gary, we will talk about that later on in the show. So I don't want to spill the beans too much,
Yeah, we
but
don't
we
want to
will.
spill the beans
Yep.
yet, but the good stuff, Gary. Thank you.
Yes. So our player of the week this week is Samir Crosby from Greensburg Central Catholic. 176 passing yards and 3 touchdowns, 150 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns in that 36-7 upset over Leechburg, and earned Greensburg Central Catholic a wild card spot in the playoffs. The other factor here for why Samir Crosby gets our player of the week award. He played quarterback for the Centurions last year, but was playing wide receiver this year. So last game of the season, they needed a spark. They moved him back to quarterback, and now,
That's
he led
incredible.
them to this big upset victory. And he's got a future. He's got some D1 offers, so his future is definitely at wide receiver at the next level. And they were trying to, be able to get the ball in his hands as a playmaker, but put him back at quarterback in week 9 and pulled the upset victory that got Greensburg Central Catholic to the playoffs. So congratulations to Samir Crosby. Antonio Perkins from Burrell had 7 total touchdowns, 360 rushing yards, 5 touchdowns on the ground, a punt return and a kickoff return. Gabe Jenkins from Amani Christian in a game against Freeport that determined the Allegheny 7 conference title in 3A, had 6 total touchdowns. Gabe was our player of the week last week. Bobby Fadden from Mohawk in a big victory that Mohawk absolutely had to have, beating Riverside to get into the 2A playoffs, had 5 total touchdowns. Carson Bellinger from Avonworth in a game against Beaver put up 5 total touchdowns. And then in that North Catholic Hopewell shootout that we mentioned, North Catholic's quarterback Joey Filitsky, who led the WPIAL in passing this season, threw for 332 and 4 touchdowns. And then Hopewell's running back Nasir Wade, who is only a sophomore, also put up 4 touchdowns on the ground with 149 rushing yards. So 2 great performances in that back and forth shootout.
Yeah, incredible numbers this year. I think there's at least a couple guys here that that they're being recognized that didn't get the 6 touchdowns in a game, but still,
You
it's
know,
pretty
it's
incredible some of these performances this
it
year.
it really is that, week in and week out when I go through the box scores and I'm like, there's guys who had 4 touchdowns that I'm not even talking about because I'm like, oh, there's this guy who had 6 and this guy who had 7. And so, and I don't just pick the guys who had the most touchdowns, but
Sure, no.
usually I try and weight in, the weight of the game, right? Like Samir Crosby for Greensburg Central Catholic, they upset the number 2 team in their conference, and that earned them a playoff spot. Gabe Jenkins for Amani, that was against Freeport head to head for the conference title. Bobby Fadden for Mohawk in a game that they needed to win to get into the playoffs. So all these top performers were also performers in big games that mattered a lot to their teams.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So our streak watch, not much changed on either the active winning streak or losing streak side. Fort Cherry extended their winning streak over WPIAL opponents to 38 straight games. That is 3 seasons worth of games, plus 2 playoffs. So Fort Cherry has been undefeated against WPIAL opponents for 3 straight regular seasons plus 2 playoff runs, as they are the back-to-back champions right now. Pretty incredible streak there for the Rangers. And they, not to spill the beans, everybody already knows, are the number 1 seed in the 1A playoffs. The other teams continuing on their WPIAL winning streak: Central Catholic, Avonworth, Peters Township, Amani Christian. And then on the losing streak side, all those teams lost pretty handily.
Wow.
All of them are,
We feel their pain.
yes. Yes. So the one thing I do want to mention here, the Union New Brighton game, I do not have confirmation of this, but all the points in that game were scored in the 4th quarter. So I'm wondering if New Brighton scored a touchdown and Union intercepted the 2-point conversion and ran it back for 2 points.
You can
Or
no, actually, that is not val. I mean, you can't do that in high school football. Only in college and above can, like, I know what you're talking about there,
yeah.
on a 2-point try that they ran it back to the other end zone. That's not in effect for high school
Okay.
football.
Okay.
It's dead as soon
Then
as the defense
touches the
touches
ball.
it, or
Okay.
right,
Yeah. All right.
fumbles it, or it's intercepted. You
I
can't get
was
any points.
I was kind of hoping that had happened because that would have been a pretty fun fun result. Must have been a safety then, which is also fun when you get
Yeah,
safety.
right. It is.
All right. And then on the conference winning streak and losing streak side, everything pretty much stayed the same here. All the same teams have continued on their winning and losing streak. So
Oof.
not much new to report there. However, now that we're into the playoffs, we do have some playoff streaks that did change. So Thomas Jefferson and Aliquippa both continued their incredible runs. The last time those two teams missed the playoffs was 1994, which is just wild to think about, that now 31 straight years both of those schools have been in the playoffs. And for Aliquippa, that goes back to, being in AA, being in 3A, being in 4A. So Aliquippa got in with one of the last wild cards in 4A and continuing on their streak. However, Bell Vernon did not make the playoffs this year, nor did Mount Lebanon after that loss to Norwin. Mount Lebanon could have got in if they had beaten Norwin. Bell Vernon just didn't do enough throughout the whole season. Had some really close games, a close loss to Chartiers Valley, a close loss to Thomas Jefferson that could have got them in. But at the end of the day, Bell Vernon did not get in. They see their 16-year playoff streak come to an end. But on the
Man.
good news side, Hopewell makes the playoffs for the first time since 2012. So ending a 12-year playoff drought. Congratulations to Coach Motts and the Vikings.
Yeah, congratulations there. We like to see the teams on the losing streak and the droughts kind of get squared away.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And, I know Hopewell lost to North Catholic and they wound up getting a wild card, but they got a pretty good seed, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And I like their chances to make some noise in the
All
playoffs.
right.
So, one other thing to mention, playoff victory droughts. So the teams in bold are ones that did make the playoffs this year. So we do have, this is kind of that storyline watch, right? Like it hasn't become a story yet, but if one of these teams pulls off a victory this week, these are the 10 teams with the longest active playoff droughts in the WPIAL. So Avella hasn't won a playoff game since 1961. Kiski hasn't won one since 1990. And then Chartiers Houston has the most losses of any team since their last playoff win, which is 13 losses in the playoffs. So they've made the playoffs a lot,
Ooh.
just haven't won a
Yeah,
game.
right. Haven't done well.
Yep. Yeah, and North Hills, I should mention also, their last playoff win was in 2010, and they're 0-10 in the playoffs since then. So,
Ouch.
another storyline to watch, though, right? That if one of these
Yeah.
teams pulls off a victory, they're going to potentially end a playoff drought that has lasted longer than all the kids on the team were alive, right? Because these are all 20+ year droughts from when they last won a playoff game,
Well,
which
if
is
there's a storyline to be found, you will find it there, Ian.
yeah, and a couple of these teams I'll say might have a chance. I think Kiski's got a chance to end theirs. So we'll see how the other ones play
Yeah, I'm
out.
interested to see the Charters matchup too.
Yeah. So let's talk about the playoffs real quick before we get into everything. So in 6A, the top 4 teams in the conference made it. In 5A, there were 12 teams, 3 from each conference plus 3 wild cards. 4A, the smallest playoff field, and that's because of when the WPIAL champion has to enter the state bracket. It's not something that the WPIAL did. The WPIAL did not just decide it was going to be 8 teams. It was, the state said because of all the formulas they use to figure out the statewide brackets, it's, hey, the WPIAL champion is entering the state playoffs in the quarterfinals. All the other WPIAL champions are entering in the semifinals. So the WPIAL only had 3 weeks for the 4A playoffs. So that's why they only can get 8 teams in, because, if you do the math, 3 weeks, you can only have quarterfinals and on,
Right.
which
And
is,
there's that many more 4A teams. I think what we pointed out, there's that many more 4A teams than any other classification, I think, in the state. And that's why, I mean, the brackets are just full that far out.
yeah, yeah, pretty much. So I know there's some consternation that always goes around about, why is the WPIAL keeping teams out of the playoffs? It's not the WPIAL, it's how the state set up the brackets. It just is what it is. In 3A, 2A, 1A, all those have 3 from each conference, and then the WPIAL picks some wild cards to add to the playoff field. So let's start talking about the playoffs themselves. We've teased them enough, so here we
Oh,
go.
da, 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 da. Drum
Yep.
roll, please.
Yes. So, um, just for reference, as we talk about playoff
Mr.
history
PA
here.
football history here.
Yes. So, the WPIAL's first championships were held in the 1910s, and then other classes were added Originally, they were called AA, A, and B. In 1973, when the WPIAL merged with the Pittsburgh Catholic League, then they changed the names of the conferences to A, AA, or classifications to A, AA, AAA, but they were functionally the exact same thing. It was just a notation change. Then in 1980, the state instituted 4 classifications statewide. And so they kept the same kind of numerical system of denoting classifications of single A through quad A. And then in 2016, the state moved to 6 classifications. But I think it's important to note kind of you're looking at basically the same pool of teams here. So that when it's not the same thing to have won a quad A championship in 2010 as it is to win a 4A championship now, right?
Yeah, right.
Quad A was the biggest classification. Now it's 6A. So in any notes you see here on out going forward in my slides, things that happened before 2016 will have like multiple A's. Things that happen after 2016 will have a number and a letter to kind of denote when things happen as well. So,
Okay, all right.
yes.
Duly noted.
Yes. All right, so let's start in 6A, where top 4 made the playoffs, and the bracketing was pretty easy because they were just bracketed in order of finish from the one conference that there was. So Central Catholic first, North Allegheny second, Norwin third, Cannon Mac fourth. Central Catholic just beat Cannon Mac 45-10 this past weekend. So not much of a surprise of what's going to happen there. But I think the real intrigue here is the North Allegheny Norwin matchup. Now, I will note that because there's only 4 teams in the playoffs, they all have a bye week this week, so they're not going to play this week. So North Allegheny does have another week to get healthy, get fresh, game plan some things, and get ready for their game against Norwin coming up next weekend. So that may be a little bit of a factor in North Allegheny's favor. Art Walker is one of the best coaches in the WPIAL, one of the best coaches in WPIAL history. But this is a North Allegheny team that is kind of reeling right now and needs to right the ship. And so let's talk about the 4 teams in the playoffs. So Central Catholic, number 1 seed, undefeated in conference play. Their only loss this year was that week 0 game against LaSalle College. That was pretty much arguably maybe the game of the year in the state so far, just with
Yeah,
how everything
pretty
else has
close to
gone.
that.
At least as far as a premier matchup goes, and quite possibly a preview of the state championship game, although there's some other good teams in 6A that'll have a say about that. But Central Catholic, best offense, best defense in the classification, 23rd consecutive playoff appearance. They've been to 11 of the last 12 WPIAL championships, the defending WPIAL champions, and they're the far and away presumptive favorite here to win back-to-back WPIAL titles. They are head and shoulders better than everyone else in 6A this year. They will face Cannon McMillan, who is making their 6th playoff appearance in the last 8 years. They've only won 1 playoff game in school history. That was all the way back in 2004. Cannonsburg did tie New Brighton for the 1950 championship, so they do have 1 championship in their school history, but they tied that game, not won it. And back then there was no overtime, so both teams were just co-champions. But Cannon Mac draws Central Catholic in the first round of the playoffs, and we've talked about what happened in that head-to-head game this past weekend.
Yes, we did.
Yes. So North Allegheny, the number 2 seed, as we mentioned with that blood in the water slide last week. And if you didn't tune into the show last week, go back and just rewatch it just for the blood in the water discussion about North Allegheny, because they are 7-3, but overall 4-2 in conference play. But they're coming off one of their worst losses in school history, a 67-0 defeat to their rivals Pine Richland. Just lost to Seneca Valley, who didn't even make the playoffs in week 9, and had a bunch of other close results. They only beat Norwin by 3 in a game that Norwin controlled most of the game, had a late fumble that North Allegheny turned into points that wound up sealing the game for them. So I think this North Allegheny Norwin game is going to be one of the best matchups next weekend because North Allegheny has been to 4 of the last 5 WPIAL finals, and 22 straight playoff appearances. The history is all there for North Allegheny, but Norwin is the up and coming team that's battled through so much adversity. We had Josh Leonard, their linebacker, on a few weeks ago. Really well spoken young man, a senior captain on the team, and they've now made the playoffs for the first time since 2017. Their last playoff win was in 2007. They've never made a WPIAL title. The last time they were even in the semifinals was 1999. But this is a Norwin team that's been tough and gritty and played a bunch of close games all year and pulled out games in tight situations. Yes, they lost that one to North Allegheny, but they've faced a ton of adversity and just not quit. And this would be one of the best storylines of the year if Norwin's able to top North Allegheny and make the first championship game in school history.
Well, and just like with anything, North Allegheny's reeling, Norwin's on a high. And look, the longer that they stay in that game or are ahead, you know what they say about that. I mean, so I think it's going to be enormously important for North Allegheny to get a really good, emphatic start to, when they play. Now, obviously, we're previewing. I mean, the game isn't for a couple of weeks, but I'm just saying, in games like this, the favored team or the North Allegheny, I think that they've really got to put their foot on the throat of Norwin early, or they can really expect, I think, an enormously difficult game.
Yeah, and just based on the results that both teams have had this year, I think all signs point to another pretty tight battle. Just all game long, right? Both of these teams have played a bunch of close games this year. So I have a hard time seeing one team get up big early, but you never know. The playoffs are a different animal, and Art Walker, for everything he's done in his career, has been there, done that, won multiple WPIAL titles both at Central Catholic and at North Allegheny. So, all the experiences with North Allegheny, they're going to be at home. They're going to be the favorites. They're the higher seed. But, Norwin has not shied away from any challenge this year, and they've battled through a ton of adversity. So I think they've got a fighting chance in this game.
Yeah, I do too.
All right, let's talk 5A, where Pine Richland, the defending champions, are the number 1 seed. The other 2 conference champions, Peters Township and Woodland Hills, are the 2 and the 3 seeds. Not a whole lot of surprises in the top part of the bracket. I think the big shocker was South Fayette missing the playoffs, not getting selected for a wild card. Armstrong got a wild card over South Fayette. I posted some stuff on Twitter with a head-to-head comparison of their schedules. I didn't really understand the WPIAL committee's decision there to choose Armstrong over South Fayette for the last wild card spot, but they did. So here we are. And let's talk about the teams that are in the playoffs and not dwell on, what happened in the past. So we'll run through
Right.
the 5A playoff field here. And really, just looking at the way this bracket shapes up, I will say, I think Pine Richland and Peters Township are the odds-on favorites to meet in the championship game for the 3rd straight year. I would have a hard time seeing another team knock them off. That said, I think Peters may get a bit of a battle in the semifinals between either Woodland Hills or Upper St. Clair. That if Woodland Hills faces Upper St. Clair in the quarterfinals, that's going to be a fantastic game. And Penn Trafford, the 4 seed, beat Moon, who's the 5 seed, by 1 earlier this year. So potentially a rematch of that game where Moon had a big lead. I think it was like 24-10, and Penn Trafford stormed back and won that one 25-24. So there's probably gonna be some good second round matchups here, but let's talk about every team in the field as well. So Pine Richland, defending WPIAL champions, they've made 3 straight WPIAL finals in 5A. This is their 13th straight playoff appearance. 7-time WPIAL champions. All within the last 22 years, dating back to 2003 when they won their first one. Plus, have won the state title a few times. So they're just clicking on all cylinders right now. They've got a fully to use a Star Wars term, this is a fully armed and operational battle station here. They've got D1 recruits at receiver on the lines. They've got a D1 recruit at quarterback in Aaron Obi Strader, and a pretty darn good running back in McLean Miller. So they are just absolutely loaded, and their only loss this year was against Central Catholic. So I think Pine Richland has just dominated everyone they faced, including North Allegheny 2 weeks ago when they beat them 67-0.
Yeah. I think that they took a lot of frustration out there, and that's why I think too that if there's going to be any, Pine Richland is so dominant. I think if there's any kind of moving or shaking going on, in the 5A bracket, I think it's going to be, as you touched on a little bit, in the bottom part of the bracket, with Woodland Hills and Upper St. Clair and how that all plays out. I think that's where the storyline is going to be, because we know where the storyline is in the top of the bracket.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the storyline here is basically who's going to play Pine Richland for the WPIAL title.
Right, correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, so the number 2 seed is the Peters Township Indians, undefeated regular season, the only undefeated team in 5A in the bracket, Allegheny 6 conference champions. I think it's worth noting that the Allegheny 6 conference has put a team in the WPIAL final in 7 straight years. So between Peters Township, Upper St. Clair, Moon, and Bethel Park, they've got 4 teams in the bracket, so 4 chances to do it again this year. Peters Township, best defense in the classification. They've got a couple power conference school recruits at edge rusher and outside linebacker. Nolan DeLucia, their quarterback, can throw the ball over the yard. Cole Newpaver, their running back, has been really good this year. So this is a really good Peters Township team that has just gone out and kind of quietly dominated everyone they've played. Like they haven't, they've smoked almost everyone. They had a close game against Upper St. Clair. I think it was 24-21, and a close game against Moon. But other than that, everyone else, they're not putting up, 50 or 60 points a week, but it's, last week they beat Bethel Park 35-0, and Bethel Park, just going back here, right? Bethel Park was averaging 36 points a game, and Peters just beat them 35-0. Like,
and that's the thing. They just don't seem to get any love. I mean, they won it, 2023 there, yeah. And then been in the last 2 finals. One of these guys really, the problem is that, you've got the 800-pound gorilla in Pine Richland, in 5A there, and it's like, they're being left on the altar here for the last couple of years,
Well, and you're right that this Peters Township, I think the other thing too is they're not necessarily I'll say traditionally strong program. They've just really built their program up over the last decade or so, that they made the semifinals in 2018, and I think that was their okay, there we go. So we'll talk about 2019, right? That was their first trip to the semis in like over 20 years. But right. Then 2019, they'd never been to a WPIAL championship game before. So really, this is like the last 7 years. Mm-hmm. And yes, they've been to 4 WPIAL title games in the last 6 years. So this is kind of a program that is recently risen to be among the elites, and they are absolutely an elite program right now. 4 championship games in 6 years.
Yeah, that's elite status.
Is elite status, but it's one where, because they don't necessarily have the 60, 70, 80 year tradition that some other schools have, they're not often thought of with some of those other upper echelon teams, but they're absolutely right there with them. Right. And I mean, could potentially make their 5th championship game in 7 years. So really good
Peters stuff there, though. I mean, yep. Good stuff.
Woodland Hills is a program that's deep in tradition. 28 of the last 30 years they've made the playoffs. Last year they had some unfortunate injuries right before the postseason, which kind of limited their ability to do much in the playoffs. But this year they are fully healthy with Cam Walter, their school record-setting quarterback, Scoop Smith, a D1 recruit at wide receiver, and a bunch of other talented players. Woodland Hills just cruised through the Big East Conference and winning the conference title. So this is a really good Woodland Hills team. They almost knocked off North Allegheny back in week 0, if you remember. That was
Yeah.
a 2-point loss, and
And see, I think they're peaking right now too.
they are. They've just been crushing everybody. It was a pretty no nonsense 28-0 win over Kiski this past week, but Woodland Hills is a really good team. And they're going to get a first round bye here, have a chance to get a breather, get healthy, and make sure they're ready to go for their quarterfinal matchup. Penn Trafford got the number 4 seed based on their head-to-head win over Moon earlier this year. They've got a 9-1 overall record. Their only loss was to Woodland Hills. They beat Moon. They actually beat Norwin on a week 0 game where they. I'll say somewhat controversial refereeing decision at the goal line. There was a quarterback sneak, and there was a quarterback sneak with a fumble on the play, and it went Penn Trafford's way. But nevertheless, that was all the way back in week 0. And credits to those teams. Neither of those teams let it derail their season. That they both put together good years and made the playoffs. Penn Trafford getting a first round bye. And this was an impressive season for Penn Trafford as well, I should mention, because they graduated a lot of kids from their team last year. They had to replace a number of their starters. So I think for them to be able to go out and put together a 9-1 season where they made the playoffs and got a first round bye is incredibly impressive after, having to replace a lot of their starters.
Yep.
All right. So now let's talk about the rest of the bracket. So starting with the 8-9 matchup, Shaler makes the playoffs for the first time since 2019, getting in and getting the number 8 seed. They got in thanks to a head-to-head victory over North Hill. So they were actually the number 2 team out of the Northeast Conference. And this is why you never give up on your season, because Shaler, seemed like they were down and out, didn't win a game in non-conference play, and came back now and won 3 games in their conference and are the number 8 seed. So with a 3-7 overall record, they made the playoffs, and here they are with a first round
Surprise,
matchup.
surprise. Yeah, surprise, surprise. And, considering too, they haven't made the playoffs in so long, I think that's a great testament to what you talked about. Not letting it you really get them down, and here they're playing, in the postseason.
Yep, absolutely. And I referenced this earlier, but they got a first round matchup against Kiski, who hasn't won a playoff game since 1990. So Kiski
Hey,
now in this, so I think this one, might not be the most high profile game, but I think this one's the biggest storyline game of the week, that one of these teams is going to win a playoff game, right?
yeah.
Kiski hasn't won one since 1990. Shaler hasn't won one since 2009. So
We're going
both
to
of
have a
these
tough
teams.
decision on what coach to bring on next week.
Yeah, we are. We are. There's going to be some really good storylines that, all coming to a head here as we get through the playoffs. And these are the really fun ones of these teams that haven't had success much in recent years, but kind of rising up and doing good things. So Kiski won a 3-way tie with Gateway and Armstrong to get the 3rd guaranteed playoff spot out of the Big East Conference, and getting the number 9 seed now. Has to travel to Shaler, and a matchup between 2 teams that will produce a good storyline.
That are playing with these two. These are the perfect example of playing with house money right now.
Yes.
I
Yes.
mean, they're out there, and it's all for, school and the WPIAL and everything else, because it's, quite honestly, it's likely whoever wins, well, I guess they've got a tough road to hoe the next week.
Yeah, whoever wins has to play Pine Richland. So
Right.
it's yeah. All right. So the Moon Tigers are the number 5 seed. They have been a really quietly good team all year. They beat Upper St. Clair. They played Peters Township tough. and Moon pulled off one against South Fayette in the final week of the season. So, they had that 1 point loss to Penn Trafford earlier in the year. I think this is a Moon team that could make some noise in the playoffs. Getting a rematch against Penn Trafford in the quarterfinals, potentially Moon could make a run all the way to the semis, maybe. So we'll see how it goes for Moon, but they've been really good and they've been able to be multiple. They've got a D1 recruit at defensive end in Davion Taylor, who I think I saw was pretty close to breaking the statewide career sack record. I was trying to get some confirmation of that one, but he's been plugged in at running back in key situations. And when you've got a kid that's that good of an athlete, and you can plug him in as a fresh running back late in the game to pick up short yardage situations. Last week they had a couple 4th-and-1s and they plugged in Davion Taylor, and he was able to convert those short yardage situations. So Moon's a really good team that I've been talking about Moon all year. I feel like that they're one that's potentially set to make some noise here in the 5A playoffs.
Yeah, they are, and we're starting to get some good comments too. Darksider and Kyle, check out the live chat. I mean, these guys are making great points. And jump in the live chat, guys. Let everybody, see your opinions. That's what this is all about.
Yeah, we really appreciate everyone who watches the show, but definitely if you have a question for us as we go through this, happy to talk about any questions that the fans might have as well. So Armstrong getting the number 12 seed. We mentioned that there was some discussion, especially a lot on Twitter
Yeah,
and
there
Facebook,
was.
about whether or not this should have been South Fayette getting this last spot in the playoff field, especially given some of their I'll say comparable results. That they did play some common opponents, and South Fayette had better results than Armstrong did against some of those common opponents, but Armstrong gets in. So this is the 6th playoff appearance since Armstrong was formed by the merger of Ford City and Katanning in 2015. They've won 2 games in that time span. Neither of their predecessor schools ever won a WPIAL championship. So still kind of searching for their first championship in school history, but Armstrong getting in. And they're a team that's put up some points this year. They've got a pretty good wide receiver in Jaden Oliver. So this could be an interesting matchup for Moon. Because Armstrong can score as well. Upper St. Clair getting the number 6 seed.
Boy, shoot. You didn't think a couple of weeks ago that they would be coming in as the number 6 seed, did you?
No, I was thinking they'd be probably the 3 or 4 seed. They had
Exactly.
already, they lost to Peters Township in a very close game.
Well, right. That was the thing. That was going to be for the number 2 seed, and then
Yeah.
they took a little beating here.
Yeah, well, I think it was, they lost to Peters in a close game and then they lost to Moon in a close game. So when you start to go through kind of the bracketology that we talked about last week, it was like, well, okay, you've got Peters Township is your 2 seed. Okay, that makes sense. And then you've got, Penn Trafford beat Moon head to head. So Penn Trafford was the 4 seed, Moon's the 5. Moon beat Upper St. Clair head to head. So Upper St. Clair just kind of slots in as the number 6 seed. And
Yeah.
this is a
Well,
really, really good Upper St. Clair team, though. I mean, this is a team capable of making it all the way to the championship game. I mean, they
and that was
play,
my point.
yeah.
That was my point here is that I think if there's a dark horse pick in 5A, to make it to the championship game to play Pine Ridge, and I think it's Upper St. Clair.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they've definitely got the offense to do it. And they lost to Moon 24-20, or I'm sorry, they lost to Peters Township 24-20. They lost to Moon 20-13 in double overtime. That was a 10-10 game at the end of regulation. They both kicked field goals in the first one. Moon scored a touchdown in the second overtime, and then Upper St. Clair threw an interception. So, I mean, when you're saying like if they had pulled out those 2 games, they would have been the number 2 seed. But a 4-point loss to Peters and a double overtime loss to Moon puts them in the number 6 seed. But this is a really good Upper St. Clair team that in their last 3 victories, their 3 conference wins, they scored 50+ points in all 3 of those. So
Yeah,
they're,
they're on
yeah.
a
And
number 6 seed. Ooh,
Yeah. And they got a win over McKeesport, who's the #1 seed in 4A. So this is a
A
loaded Upper St. Clair
well-oiled
team.
machine, man.
Yeah, Ethan Hellman, their quarterback, throws an awesome deep ball. He's got a great arm. They've got two good receivers, a solid running game. So I think for Upper St. Clair, this is definitely a team that can make some noise. They draw the Plum team that had that crazy victory over Penn Hills last week with the field goal getting blocked at the end of regulation and then running it in for their kicker scooping it up and running it in for a touchdown. So Plum gets in as a wild card, and I think Plum deserved to get in as a wild card. They had head-to-head wins over Kiski and Gateway in non-conference play. So Plum getting in. This is their first playoff appearance since 2021, and unfortunately they draw a really good Upper St. Clair team because great storyline for Plum. They were kind of down and out. Everyone was ignoring them because they were just sitting at the near the bottom of their conference, but then they knock off Fox Chapel and go and beat Penn Hills, and all of a sudden now they're in the playoffs.
Yeah,
And that it also goes back to what they did in non-conference play, right? That we talk
sure.
about those non-conference games mattering. They beat Gateway, who is also a wild card contender. They beat
Well, they matter now,
yeah,
and a couple of years ago they didn't matter.
right.
So, when it was just strictly on conference, I mean, so look, I think that the WPIAL has come a long way in, their own WPIAL format of kind of taking or getting into the fold of how the rest of the state picks their teams. It's done by a power ranking, and you still have the garner points and everything else as a judge too. So it's not that far off, and I think the WPIAL's done a lot in coming into the fold of the rest of the state.
They're getting closer, right? Because I mean, the wild cards are picked by the committee. There's not a power ranking formula
Right.
or anything like that, but the
Yeah,
the
but they
committee
are,
does
but
pick them.
but the conference champions and everything like that, that's all garner points and
Yeah.
everything else, and that's a power ranking.
So yeah, for a tiebreaker, right? Because
Right.
win
Correct.
loss record head to head are the first tiebreakers. But
Sure.
yes,
Sure.
yep. All right. So the winner of the Upper St. Clair Plum game gets Woodland Hills in the second round, and then the final first round matchup, Bethel Park is the #7 seed, and the fourth team out of the Allegheny 6 conference. And Bethel's a team that their offense can score a bunch of points in a hurry. David Dennison, their running back, has been on our Players of the Week list multiple times. Evan Devine, their quarterback's been able to throw for a bunch of yards this year, so they can score. Their struggle this year has been more on the defensive side of the ball. And so we'll see how things play out for Bethel Park in the playoffs. They're coming off that 35-0 loss to Peters Township this past weekend. But Bethel's been a team that's kind of always been in this position, right? Made the playoffs 24 out of the last 25 years. Reached the semis a couple times lately. They have won WPIAL championship in school history, so they've always been a very solid playoff team. And it's just kind of every now and then they break through and make a run deep into the playoffs. But this is a pretty good Bethel Park program too overall. And they will face North Hills, who has not won a playoff game since 2010. But North Hills has been another team, just another very, very solid, kind of always in the playoffs, but just hasn't been able to break through and get that win lately. They've made 11 appearances in the last 13 years. They're the third team out of the Northeast Conference, getting that spot because Penn Hills lost to Plum. That North Hills beat Penn Hills in week 8. So North Hills getting in thanks to that win over Penn Hills, and then Penn Hills losing to Plum. So there was not a three-way tie. North Hills just got the third spot out of the conference, but their 3 conference wins were enough to get them there. And we'll see how it goes against Upper St. Clair, or sorry,
Yeah.
against
I'm
Bethel
glad
Park in the
North
first
Hills
round.
made it. My daughter lives in the North Hills School District. So,
Yes. All right, so on to 4A, where only 8 teams make the playoffs, as we've talked about. And this one, very narrow playoff field. And oh, hello, dear. My daughter Margaret is still awake at 10:20 at night. Hey, you need to
uh-oh.
go to bed, honey. Okay, I'll be up in a little bit and tuck you in. Okay, can you ask mommy to do that? Okay. She wants her closet door locked.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So, all right. So So in 4A, this is a family show. This is why we usually do
It
this
is
show
a
at night,
family
right?
show, and we don't shy away from that. My gosh.
Right, right. All right. So in 4A, McKeesport got the #1 overall seed in the playoffs, kind of as we expected, because with Keemon Spellback, they've definitely been the most dominant team in the 4A bracket. The two wild cards here went to Aliquippa and Chartiers Valley over West Allegheny, who we talked about earlier. But West Allegheny lost head-to-head games against both Aliquippa and Chartiers Valley. So to me, this was a pretty easy decision for the WPIAL committee to make, to say, hey, there was head-to-head results here. Char Valley and Aliquippa both beat West Allegheny. We know which two teams we're picking. So the one other bit of a surprise here in the bracket was that the WPIAL rematched two conference opponents, which they usually try not to do, but Newcastle playing Montour in the 3-6 matchup. And I think this was mostly because these are quarterfinals, not necessarily first. I mean, it's the first round of this bracket, but since they're quarterfinals, they were a
And
little less
what
concerned
was
about the conference
Trinity's record
rematches.
to get the #2 seed?
Trinity was 6-4
Okay, all right.
overall.
That's to me. I'm sitting there like, what? What? I mean, we were talking about this last week,
Right.
and I just can't understand. If they're seeding the teams and it's kind of like this whole NFL thing, how can you put Trinity at #2 and throw Mars in there against Thomas Jefferson? I mean, those two, I mean, how do you throw Mars and Thomas Jefferson into a first round matchup? That just blows my mind.
Yeah. So I think a couple factors in play here that I don't know, I'm not in the room, but just my guess. So Thomas Jefferson was the defending WPIAL champions. The WPIAL has traditionally, and we'll see this in other brackets too, um, kind of given the benefit of the doubt to the defending champion. So if the defending champion wins their conference, only has, one loss or no losses, they usually give them the top seed, right? It's usually not much of a debate. So like in 1A, where you had a really good unbeaten Clareton team, but Fort Cherry also unbeaten as the defending champions. Fort Cherry got the 1 seed, Clareton got the 2 seed. So, I think if Thomas Jefferson had won their conference, they would have been the #1 seed here. So I think with TJ being kind of in their heads as the defending champions, Trinity beat Thomas Jefferson, won that conference. I think that elevated Trinity in the eyes of the committee. Also, Trinity's losses in non-conference play were against, they lost to Peters Township, they lost to Bethel Park, they lost a close game to Montour, and they lost to Moon. So Trinity's 4 losses, 3 of them were against teams that are in the 5A playoffs. So I don't think you can hold some of those losses against them as much. Plus, they beat
So
Thomas Jefferson.
I
So
guess, yeah, and the thing
yeah.
for me too is it's just so heavily weighted than in one bracket versus another.
Mhm.
And then you're saying that an 8-2 Thomas Jefferson and an 8-2 Mars are kind of in a more difficult situation
Oh, they absolutely
than
are.
Newcastle and Montour. I mean,
Yeah.
come on,
So,
come
well,
on.
and so to finish, I think what happened was, the committee said, okay, McKeesport's our #1 seed. We think really highly of Thomas Jefferson because they beat McKeesport. They're the defending champions, but Trinity won the conference, the Big Six conference with TJ in it. So Trinity gets the #2 seed. Newcastle is the other conference champion, gets the #3 seed. And then they said, okay, who are we giving the last, top 4 seed to? Well, Thomas Jefferson's the defending champions. They have a win over Montour. We're going to give it to TJ. So then it became, okay, Mars and Montour are the 2 other second place teams, and Mars beat Montour head to head. So we're going to put Montour at 6, Mars at 5, because Mars beat them head to head, which stuck you with a rematch of Newcastle against Montour. And then they just slotted in the 2 wild card teams in Aliquippa and Chartiers Valley. So I think that's kind of how the bracket came together. If I had to make a best guess, But Mars really got the short end of the stick here with having to play Thomas Jefferson in the first round, and then potentially their conference foes McKeesport in the second round if they're able to upset the defending champions TJ. So I do feel kind of bad for Mars with the matchups they got. I had kind of felt like uh, that if
Well, I'm
Mars had
just
wound
looking
up,
at the overall. I'm just looking at
yeah,
the overall. Okay.
yeah,
And the top side of the bracket is so heavyweighted versus the bottom of the bracket. There's no
yeah,
equilibrium in my view there,
yeah.
but
Well, I had
it
felt
is
like
what it is.
Mars was a team that if they had wound up on the bottom half of the bracket away from McKeesport, they could potentially make the championship game. But
That's my point.
yeah,
That's my
yeah,
point. And in the scheme of things, they got him seated number 5. I mean,
yes,
there's okay. All right, I'm done. That was really the only thing that I had a lot of heartburn on when I was looking at the brackets. Is in the 4A, how you can put Thomas Jefferson against Mars, and B, that you have everything so heavily weighted on the top side of the bracket. So
yeah. And Kyle in the chat makes a good point. He said he probably would have switched Newcastle and Trinity, but other than that, he's fine with how they rank the teams. I agree. That was actually how not to pat myself on the back, but I'm agreeing with our very smart people in the chat that in my bracket prediction I had Newcastle as the 2 seed, Trinity as the 3 seed, and actually what they could have done in that case is kept Montour at 6, played them against Trinity in a non-conference game, and then just flipped Aliquippa and Char Valley as the 2 wild card teams to avoid another conference rematch. So you would have McKeesport, Aliquippa in the first round, and Newcastle and Char Valley.
I think that they flipping Montour with either Thomas Jefferson or Mars would have sufficed everything, and I think it makes it a much cleaner bracket that way. I don't think that you can have Thomas Jefferson and Mars in the same bracket. I think they should have been split up, but
Yeah.
that's just me.
And putting them in the same half as McKeesport, right? Who's
Yeah,
your number
right.
1 seed. That McKeesport McKeesport's been really good and they've been dominant all year. But I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that McKeesport might have a harder semifinal game than championship game.
Yeah, I would agree. Sure.
Like a McKeesport TJ game in the semis might be a more difficult matchup for them than Trinity or Newcastle or Montour or Aliquippa in the finals would be.
I think it's a great point.
Yes. All right. So let's talk about the teams, though. McKeesport with Keemon Spell at running back. I guess we can't call him a Penn State commit anymore because he decommitted. But a high Division I recruit, the top-ranked junior running back in all of Pennsylvania. He was injured for a couple games earlier this season, but he's been back with a vengeance. McKeesport runs that triple option, and they are absolutely outstanding. At just everything they do, and just makes it really hard to defend that triple option, especially when you have a running back as fast and athletically gifted as Keemon Spell in the backfield. So McKeesport, they've been the runners up the last 2 years, and the ball's in their court now to go try and win their first WPIAL title since 2005. So if McKeesport's able to do it, go out and get their first championship in the last 20 years, that would be a really good story for the Tigers on
Yeah.
the back of Keemon Spell.
Yeah, no, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and I will mention earlier this year when McKeesport lost to Thomas Jefferson, Keemon Spell, he had a sprained ankle. He played like 2 plays that game and then came out and wasn't able to play anymore. So he didn't really play much in that game when they faced off earlier this year. All right, they will face Chartiers Valley, the Colts getting into the playoffs. For the third time in the last 6 years, they got a wild card. And Chartiers Valley was kind of at the bottom of their conference last year. I think they actually finished in a 3-way tie at the bottom last year and really put together a very nice season. The Colts going out and scoring some dominant victories as well as some close ones, including that 1-point win over West Allegheny that got them into the playoffs. One other thing I want to mention here. Sorry, I'm going to go back for a second. I know that only 8 teams made the playoffs here. But just look at the points per game these teams put up. 7 of the 8 teams in the 4A bracket scored at least 30 points a game. Like these are some all these offenses
Mm-hmm.
can put points on the board. With the exception of maybe Aliquippa, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But all these teams can score. So I think this really comes down. This is 100% a matchup driven bracket, and it's how your offense matches up with the opposing defense.
Yeah.
All right, so the Thomas Jefferson Jaguars, their 2 losses this year. One came against Trinity, one came against Avonworth in non-conference play, but this is the 31st consecutive year that they have been in the postseason. They are the defending WPIAL champions. They've been to the semifinals in 25 of the last 27 years. I mean, TJ is just a machine. What Bill Cherfak's been able to do there with that group is one of the best coaches, not only currently in the WPIAL, but in WPIAL history. 10-time WPIAL champions. He's won 9 of them as the head coach. So 5 state titles to his name. It's just this is, regardless of how the regular season goes, TJ is just always a hard out in the playoffs because of all the program tradition and coaching that they have there. Chirp just knows how to win in the postseason. And they will take on Mars, who we talked about. Mars had the WPIAL's second leading rusher in Aiden Yoakum, as well as a game-breaking wide receiver in Gabe Hine, who is one of the top receivers in the WPIAL D1 recruit. So this is a really good Mars team, and Coach Casper, ton of respect for him and what he's been able to do with this Mars program. And overall, he completely revamped Mars too, because Mars was always a very run-heavy team. And Coach Casper came in, brought his downfield passing attack to Mars. And they've been to the semifinals each of the last 2 years. They've never won a WPIAL title. I think they have the most playoff appearances of any school without winning a WPIAL title. But this is a Mars team that they got beat pretty handily by McKeesport earlier this year. I think it was like 56-38 or something like that. But Mars is a good team that if they had been on the bottom half of the bracket, I think they could have made the championship game this year. But I think Mars is still a team that's a couple years away, but you never know. Coach Casper's pulled those upsets in the playoffs before. You talk about coaching. I mean, this is an A+ coaching matchup with Coach Casper against against Coach Cherpak in the first round of the playoffs.
Yeah, absolutely. That is it's just gonna be fun to watch it for the X's and O's.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. All right, so the number 2 seed is Trinity, who won their first conference title since 1986, thanks to that victory over Thomas Jefferson, and the 3rd straight playoff appearance for the Hillers, who 2 years ago snapped a little bit of a playoff drought. And this is just a great story for Trinity overall, that it had been almost 40 years since their last conference title, winning the conference title now, getting the number 2 seed in the playoffs. They've got a D1 recruited quarterback in Jonah Williamson, who's just an outstanding athlete, and a pretty good running back to go with him. So we'll see how this goes for Trinity in the postseason, but just a great regular season for Trinity, bouncing back after some struggles in non-conference play.
Yeah.
They'll take on Aliquippa, who is just seeped in program tradition, but Aliquippa had a D1 recruited quarterback in Marcus Council, who had a knee injury a few weeks ago and is out for the rest of the season. So Aliquippa's offense has really struggled to get things going since Council went out. Which definitely has impacted their ability to put points on the board. They still have a really good defense, but this could be a one and done trip to the playoffs for Aliquippa. Never count Aliquippa out. Coach Warfield there is awesome, but I think this is an Aliquippa team that the injuries and everything else just caught up with them this year. But the important thing to note with Aliquippa here is if they do go out early in the playoffs, they will not have accumulated that many success points by the state's formula. So they may actually be able to move back down in classification after they had been forced up into 4A by the success formula the last couple
Well, they
years.
even wanted to put them in 5A.
They did, which was insane. They're a 2A size school playing in 4A right now.
Yeah. No, I think everybody's in Aliquippa's court.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. Montour at the number. Wait, did I? Oh, I did them out of order. Sorry. Montour at the number 6 seed. They only lost 1 game in conference play, which was to Newcastle, which did cost them the conference title outright. They get a share of it, but Now Montour gets a rematch against Newcastle. They're another team that started a lot of young players, have a really exciting freshman on their team as well. So Montour, turned it on late in the year, beat Aliquippa handily when they faced them, and then went out and beat West Allegheny. So Montour's a really hot team right now,
They've
looking
had a
to
great season.
yeah, looking to bounce back after they were upset by Mars in the first round of the playoffs last year. And then finally, Newcastle, the last team in the 4A bracket at the number 3 seed. They won their first conference title since
Friend of the
2000.
program.
Yeah, Coach Mo. Newcastle won their first conference title since 2008. So really good, great year for Newcastle after they finished in a 3-way tie at the bottom of their conference last year as well. Rising up, winning the conference title thanks to that head-to-head win over Montour. And first playoff appearance for them since 2021. And we'll see what they're able to do. Their dual threat freshman quarterback, Marino Graham, has been outstanding this year. And, it'd be really cool to see them make a deep run in the playoffs.
Yes, it would. It really would. It might mean that we would have a coach on twice in the same season.
Yeah, that we may if they make a
Well,
deep
I
run,
think
we might have
we
Coach
may
Mo
have
back.
that this year.
Yeah, and Coach Mo's awesome. He's
Yeah.
great. All right, on to 3A now, where Avonworth is the defending champions, is the number 1 seed. Amani Christian also undefeated, the number 2 seed. I think the big surprise here, to me at least, was Central Valley getting the number 3 seed over Elizabeth Forward, who is a conference champion. Elizabeth Forward did get a first round bye. And I was thinking that Central Valley would probably get a first round bye, but I expected them to be the 4 seed instead of the 3. But they did separate Central Valley and Avonworth in the playoff bracket as the top 2 teams from the Western Hills Conference. And we'll see how it plays out. Some other good storylines to watch here is Southmoreland has never won a playoff game in their school history, taking on Hopewell, who is making their first playoff appearance since 2012. So that's another one of those really big storyline games to watch this weekend.
Yeah, and you never know. I mean, maybe it's Southmoreland who we get coach on for second time within the same season.
Yeah, and we've Coach Schoaf at Southmoreland, first year as a head coach, youngest head coach in the WPIAL right now, former WPIAL leading rusher. And I know Coach Motts at Hopewell is a friend of the program as well. So maybe whoever wins that game we'll have on next week.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about these teams. Avonworth, the defending WPIAL champions, they have reached the WPIAL final in 3 straight seasons now. Lost those 2 to Bell Vernon, who went on to win state titles. Avonworth lost in the state championship game. We had Coach John Core on earlier this year, and this is a great Avonworth team. I mean, Avonworth, they beat Thomas Jefferson, they beat Aliquippa. You could put this Avonworth team in the 4A bracket, and honestly, I think they could beat any of those 4A teams except maybe McKeesport. So, this Avonworth team is absolutely loaded. Brought back most of the team that lost in overtime in the state championship game last year. So, Carson Bellinger at quarterback, Lucan Neal is kind of the slot back, receiver, running back, Dimitri Velsarius at running back. This is a really good Avonworth team, and some big guys, some D1 recruits in the trenches as well.
Yeah, I mean, just a tremendous. It's hard to imagine the fact that they brought so many guys back and they came so close to winning it all last year.
Yeah, yeah, and I think Avonworth is not only the favorite in the WPIAL, but if they can get through the WPIAL, have a good chance at getting back to Cumberland Valley as
Yeah,
well.
I would agree 100% with
Yeah.
that.
Although they will have a tough foe in the WPIAL if Amani Christian makes it to the championship game to
Yes,
face
they
them,
will.
because Amani Christian at the number 2 seed, undefeated regular season, and they've just been blowing the pants off of everybody. I mean, this team is just stacked. They had 2 kids who are, I'll say, former Penn State commits, and Gabe Jenkins at quarterback and David Davis, who plays kind of that slot back role, also a star defensive back. Dewan Craighead at outside linebacker, and they've got D1 recruits all over the field. And some of their underclassmen too are outstanding. So this Amani team is just absolutely loaded. and they've come close a few times in the past and lost to Avonworth in the semifinals last year, which was kind of an upset. Well, it was an upset. Amani was the number one seed last year. And so we'll see how it goes this year, with Amani being the number two seed, Avonworth being the one seed. But if these two are able to meet in the championship game, I mean, that's going to be a game for the ages, because this Amani team can score with anyone. And they're just, I mean, the talent that they have at every position on the field is insane for a 3A program. And they're playing up. They're a
Yeah.
1A size school playing up in 3A and doing this.
Yeah, and I think that in the 3A bracket here, I think that you know it, Amani and Avonworth are so head and shoulders above everybody else. It's pretty hard to imagine anyone other than those two teams making it to the championship game, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, and the other
We'll talk
thing,
about them though.
we will. Yep. And Central Valley has the coach that's been there, done that, right? Coach Lyons, also
Sure.
friend of the show. And they're the only time they've only missed the playoffs once, since 2010, when the school was formed from the merger of Center and Monaca. And this is another great success story of a school merger producing, multiple time WPIAL champions, multiple time state champions. Uh, you know, in the 15 years since they've merged, they've won the WPIAL title 5 times, which is just crazy to think about.
Yeah.
But Central Valley, a pretty good, well-rounded offense with Braddock Ambrose at quarterback, Ethan Shearer at running back. Couple good guys in the trenches. Played a tough non-conference schedule. They had to play.
The last couple of years have been
Yeah,
rough.
yeah. Well, and part of it is right. The schedule the WPIAL gave them didn't do them any favors. That they had to go out and play a bunch of 4A opponents in non-conference play. So once they got into their conference schedule, they beat everyone except for Avonworth, which I think is why they were seeded so well. And they went out and beat North Hills, who was a 5A playoff team,
Sure.
last week in
Yeah,
week
that
9.
right. That win looks really good right now.
Right. So you've got, I mean, looking at Central Valley's schedule, their losses were to Montour, Thomas Jefferson, and Bell Vernon, who are all 4A teams, and then they lost to Avonworth. So I think the WPIAL scheduling committee did give them a little benefit of the doubt, giving them, the number 3 seed, saying, hey, really, if you had played all 3A opponents, you would probably be closer to 9-1 than 6-4. But we gave you a tough schedule, so that strength of schedule kind of played into them getting the number 3 seed.
Sure.
At the number 4 seed is Elizabeth Forward. Their only loss came against South Fayette, who was shafted out of the 5A playoffs. But Elizabeth Forward just dominated conference competition. And I do think this was a trend here that we saw, that the interstate conference was not seeded as well, despite their overall records, right? Elizabeth Forward 9-1 overall, getting seeded behind 6-4 Central Valley. But I think that's kind of a facet of the schedule that they played. Like, I think the WPIAL said, hey, Central Valley played a much tougher schedule, so we're going to seed them a little bit higher. Elizabeth Forward still getting a bye. And this is another program that over the 6 years we've done this show, right, has made their first WPIAL championship game ever back in 2020. It has now been kind of a consistent semifinalist, and another program on the rise.
So I guess the only conspiracy theory question to ask is, are there any of the people on like the playoff committee, the ones that kind of put the schedules together too?
I think the WPIAL committee, overall, the WPIAL steering committee, they are the playoff committee, and I think they do put the schedules together too.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
All right. Enough
Yeah.
said.
Yeah. But I think in a sense that helps kind of balance the fairness of it, right?
Mhm.
The committee says, hey, we're going to give you a tough schedule because we think you're a good team, but we won't count it against you if you
But then
lose
we
some of those
reward, right? We
games.
reward you at the end for playing that schedule that we gave you.
Right. Right. Exactly. And Elizabeth Forward's got a great quarterback in Ryan Messina, who can run and pass, really good dual threat. So they're a fun team to watch play, and they can put points up all over the place. At the number 8 seed, so the winner of this game will take on Avonworth. Freeport seeded 8th. finished third in the Allegheny 7 conference after they lost by 1 point in overtime to Highlands, who finished second. Freeport had a shot to split the conference title 3 ways against Amani Christian, but got absolutely destroyed 53-7 the final week of the season. But Freeport does have a pretty good tandem in the backfield of quarterback Drew Ross and their running back Amos Glenn, who was one of the top scorers in the whole WPIAL. Amos Glenn, I think he came in second in the overall scoring race. I'm pulling it up here. Yeah, 28 total touchdowns, actually came in third.
That's a fabulous year.
Yeah, 28 total touchdowns for Amos Glenn from Freeport. Plays running back, but also as a kick returner, so he scored touchdowns in multiple ways. And definitely a guy that's a threat to score anytime he gets his hands on the ball. Freeport's been to the playoffs 34 times, so they're up there with Mars. I think Freeport has reached the finals the most times of any school that's never won a championship, with 7 trips to the finals, but never winning one. Coach Gaylott from Freeport, I think, was actually on the show the very first year we did the show.
Wow. See, now that's a great memory. I would not have known that.
Yes.
I would not have known that. And, we're going to have to actually come up with like a WPIAL, a Blitz show, trivia question of the week, maybe next year.
I'd have to,
you know,
I can remember these things in the moment ahead of time. If you ask me, I don't know. It's just how my brain works. All right, the
we'll have to
Beaver.
do that. We've been on long enough now, where we should have like the podcast, trivia question of the week or something.
Yeah, yeah. All right, the Beaver Bobcats are the number 9 seed. They finished 4th in the Western Hills Conference, so they were a wild card team. So I said that Freeport was the number 8 seed because they finished 3rd in their conference because they lost by 1 point to Highlands in overtime, and that was actually a game where they lost by 1 because Highlands blocked the extra point in overtime that would have tied it to send it to double overtime. So crazy result there. But Beaver had an overtime loss to North Catholic, which was the difference between them finishing 3rd and 4th. But Beaver also beat Hopewell by just 1 point because Hopewell went for 2 in the win and missed it at the end of regulation. So Beaver, North Catholic, and Hopewell were all really close in the middle of that Western Hills Conference. So this is a very good Beaver team. They can score with anyone. Their problem is on the defensive side of the ball where they've struggled to stop people. So we'll see how this Beaver and Freeport game plays out. This one, if you're looking for a game that could potentially be a shootout, I think this Beaver Freeport game, considering Beaver gives up 33 points a game, Freeport's got a decent defense on them, but both of them score in the mid 30s. So I think this could be a shootout that could really be a high scoring affair.
Yeah, I'll probably end up 10-7. So
that's how those ones usually go, right? When I'm like, oh, this game's gonna be a shootout, and then it winds up 10-7. Yeah. Yep. Another team that can score but can't stop anybody is my alma mater, the North Catholic Trojans. I'm here wearing a North Catholic shirt tonight. I do have a North Catholic shirt on. Yeah. Got to support the old alma mater. But they've got the WPIAL's leading passer in Joey Filitsky and a whole slew of talented backs and receivers to go along with them. So they can score with anybody. Their problem's just on the defensive side of the ball and actually stopping people. So North as the number 5 seed, potentially very interesting second round matchup against Elizabeth Forward, who they faced last year in the quarterfinals and was a pretty close game. I think it was a 1-score game. North lost, but it was a 1-score game last year. And 17th playoff appearance in the last 19 years. All of that since I graduated more than 20 years ago. So North has turned things around since the time I was there, and we were pretty bad my senior year.
Well, we're on pace to make it to midnight.
All right, I'll speed things up a little
bit.
Well,
no. I'm just saying, it's
all right. Burrell got the number 12 seed. They got the number 12 seed thanks to a head-to-head win over Mount Pleasant earlier this year. Burrell, the wild card out of the Allegheny 7 conference. actually the fourth playoff appearance for Burrow in the last 5 years, which is impressive considering they moved up from 3A to 4A. Antonio Perkins was on our list of players of the week this week. So, he can run the ball all over the field. So against North Catholic's defense, could be a player to watch to put up some numbers this week.
Yeah,
All right.
I think Burrow could be one of the dark horses there. Go back one. I know that I just said we needed to speed it up a little, but I like Burrow's chances. I really do. I know that they have a tough record there, but they'd be kind of like my pick to be kind of a dark horse team here.
Those 5-12 upsets do happen sometimes.
That's right.
Yep. On the bottom half of the bracket, Highlands, the number 6 seed, played Amani Christian closer than anyone else did this year. But by played anyone else closer, I mean it was a 27-7 result. But they were the only team
relative terms.
In relative terms, right? Exactly. They've got a really good running back in Tevin Owen Kratzenberg, who's put up a ton of yards, a ton of touchdowns this year. Could be a good second round matchup against Central Valley if Highlands is able to get past Derry, who's back in the playoffs. Congratulations to Derry. They get in after beating Mount Pleasant a couple weeks ago. So the Trojans back in the playoffs after they finished down at the bottom of their conference last year in the 3A Interstate. So one other thing I think worth mentioning with this 3A field is you've got two teams in Burrell and Derry who moved up from 2A at the beginning of this cycle, which granted that was last year, but went through some struggles last year, but then have adapted pretty quickly to playing in 3A and both got into the playoffs this year.
Yeah. Hats off to them. Not that is a really difficult formula to move up. And as you said, a lot of teams are unsuccessful in doing that. It is a real mindset that you have to want to do it. I talk to all these coaches all the time, and all they do, or the vast majority of them, complain about the fact that, oh, I'm not a 6A school, or oh no, I'm not a 5A school, or whatever, and it is what it is. But it's the most constant complaint. So to see schools that take it upon themselves to play up like that and be successful, hats off to those schools.
Well, their enrollment moved them up, but yes, they did play up higher. They moved up and adapted. But yes. All right. Oh, and then sorry, the one more. Southmoreland is the number 7 seed. I think this one was a fairly large surprise to me too, that Southmoreland at 9-1 overall. Like, yes, they got smoked by Elizabeth Forward, but they had, dominated most of the rest of their competition.
They did.
Dropping them all the way to the number 7 seed. I had them picked as my number 5 seed, so I thought they'd get seeded quite a bit higher. But like I said, that interstate conference got seeded a bit lower than what we expected. So Southmoreland never won a playoff game, and they're taking on a Hopewell team who's just loaded with young talent. This Hopewell team's probably a year or so away from making a deep run in the playoffs. But Hopewell, sophomore quarterback James Armstrong is a great dual threat player. He played through an injury the last couple weeks, so hopefully he's fully healthy next week and can, be good to go for the playoffs. And their running back Nasir Wade's taken on a lot of the weight of the offense, but ran for 4 touchdowns last week against North Catholic. So I think this is a very good Hopewell team that's going to give Southmoreland everything they can handle. And congratulations to Hopewell getting into the playoffs for the first time since 2012, snapping the longest playoff drought in the WPIAL.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, on to 2A. We'll try and speed things up a little bit here just because we've been on for quite a while. And we've got 2A and 1A to get through. So not a lot of surprises in the 2A bracket overall. The 3 conference champions got the 3 byes. So we'll just run through all the teams. Seton LaSalle beat Washington last week to win the Century Conference title, got the number 1 overall seed. Their only loss this year was against North Catholic back in week 0, who's a 3A team, so can't really hold that too much against them. Seton lost in the WPIAL championship last year to South Park. They've got a loaded roster and are very good, and I think have a very good chance to make it back to the finals again this year. The number 2 seed, the Western Beaver, Golden Beavers, they hit a little bit of a blip in the middle of the year with a 20-point loss to Mohawk and then a very close win over New Brighton, but turned it around the last week of the year, dominated Freedom. Their star running back, Wyatt Sparbani, back in full force against Freedom and ran for a ton of yards and touchdowns. So this is
great
a really
season good for Western Beaver.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. They've lost to Steel Valley in the quarterfinals each of the last 2 years, and kind of unfortunately for Western Beaver, with them on the bottom half of the bracket is Steel Valley, who they wouldn't have to play until the semifinals, but potentially that matchup is looming. Steel Valley getting the number 3 seed after they beat South Allegheny in week 9 to force that three-way tie at the top of the conference, and Steel Valley winning that three-way tie on tiebreakers and getting that first round bye. And their running back Deron Barksdale's a Pitt commit, and he can just fly, and he's really, really good. So, his older brother was also at Steel Valley the last couple of years, and the Barksdales are really good players, and this is kind of his going away present, that he hasn't been quiet about the fact that he's going to go out and put on a show every Friday night. So this is a Steel Valley team very capable of making it all the way to the championship game.
I would agree.
Yep.
I think that they've got a real shot.
Yeah, and I think 2A might be the most wide open bracket, just because all these teams have kind of beaten each other, and so it's kind of hard to pick one team that's Seton LaSalle is probably the best team, but a lot of these other teams have beaten each other over the course of the season, so it's hard to pick one team that's going to kind of rise up and make a big run. Now, I will say for Mohawk, they played their way into the playoffs. They had a pretty bad start to the season. They lost 4 games in a row in September and bounced back from a 2-5 start to the year. They won their last 3 games, 20-point win over Western Beaver, 29-point win over Freedom, and then beat Riverside in the final week of the season. Mohawk had a couple injuries early in the year. Their dual threat quarterback Bobby Fadden's a really exciting player, but Mohawk turned it on in October, did what they needed to do to get into the playoffs. And this is a hot Mohawk team. I would not want to face this team. Unfortunately for Olsh, they did draw Mohawk. Olsh beat Keystone Oaks the last week of the year, so Olsh getting a wild card and getting seated ahead of Keystone Oaks because of that head-to-head win. 9th playoff appearance in the last 10 years for Olsh, and I think this is another program that is actually a relatively new program. Just started playing football in 2010, but Olsh has had some success, and
Yeah, they have.
Yep, they've played a bunch of low-scoring games this year, but we'll see how it goes against Mohawk, who has been putting up points like crazy the last few weeks. South Allegheny was undefeated, the only undefeated team in 2A heading into week 9 before they lost handily to Steel Valley. South Allegheny's got a great wide receiver in Drew Cook, Elijah Cook at quarterback, and just a dominant, huge offensive line that just is a road graders up front. So South A falling down to the number 4 seed, not getting a first round bye after losing to Steel Valley. But I think this is a team potentially that could make some noise in the playoffs just with the size and tenacity of their offensive line. Last year, they won their first playoff game since 1986, and now are co-conference champions for the first time since '86 as well. Couldn't quite win it outright, but still co-champions of the conference. They draw Waynesburg, who got the last wild card into the playoffs. Waynesburg making their 3rd straight playoff appearance, but haven't won a playoff game since 2000. Waynesburg getting in after beating up on the teams at the bottom of their conference who were not very good, but Waynesburg still puts it. Teams at the bottom of the conference are bad, but Waynesburg putting together a really good year, 5-5, and 3rd straight playoff appearance for a Waynesburg team that I think had only made the playoffs once between 2001 and 2016. So Waynesburg putting together a nice little run here as well. Washington gets the number 5 seed after they lost head-to-head to Seton LaSalle in a relatively close game. It was 27-14, but Washington's other loss came against Steel Valley. So their only 2 losses were to conference champions. So a potential.
This is my underdog pick. I mean, here is Washington.
They're loaded with talented players, and a potential second round Washington South Allegheny game, that's quarterfinal worthy, if not, or I mean, that's semifinal worthy, if not potentially championship game worthy, having to happen in the quarterfinal. So Washington against South Allegheny potentially in the second round of the playoffs is just an awesome, awesome matchup in 2A between two really good teams. Washington taking on Beaver Falls. What a great comeback story. Beaver Falls went 0-10 last year and bounces back to make the playoffs this year. They get a wild card after playing a number of close, tight games. Beaver Falls was kind of the cardiac cats this season, just winning a bunch of close, tight games in the fourth quarter. So congrats to Beaver Falls getting back into the playoffs after going winless last year.
Yeah, you always like those feel good stories, and the coaching staff just has to be, you know, commended big time to get that losing culture, flush that losing culture, and gain confidence there. I mean, that is a lot to overcome. Just a great job by the Tigers.
Yep, absolutely. Apollo Ridge getting a number 7 seed. Another team that kind of rose up out of the bottom of their conference this year. They split the conference title because they beat Steel Valley head to head on a touchdown pass right at the end of the game. So Apollo Ridge, Steel Valley, South Allegheny all split their head to head, so they're all co-conference champions. But Apollo Ridge has some talented players as well, and it's been kind of a fun team to follow this year. Played in a bunch of close games, so getting back into the playoffs now after a couple of down years. But their fourth playoff appearance in the last 7 years, and they draw a Riverside team who's back in the playoffs again. Riverside got into the playoffs last year as well, but Riverside getting the number 10 seed after they lost to Mohawk the final week of the season. But Riverside has a pretty good quarterback as well, so this should be a competitive game, I think, between these two teams in this 7-10 matchup, with the winner facing Western Beaver in the quarterfinals.
Yeah, I think there are so many intriguing, first round matchups, especially in 1A, and 2A this year.
Yes, absolutely. And then Elwood City, who won the conference title last year, finished in second place this year, getting the number 6 seed in the playoffs. Most of their players from last year, who took them on that run to the semifinals, they all graduated, but Elwood City was able to replace them and still get back into the playoffs. So just speaking to the culture that they've built up there as well. Congrats to Elwood City getting into the postseason, and they will face Keystone Oaks, a team that has, they made the playoffs for the 6th straight year. This was not a very good Keystone Oaks teams. They beat up on the teams at the bottom of the conference, but didn't do very well. They weren't very competitive against the top teams of the conference. They lost like 50 points to both Seton and Washington. So, KO getting into the playoffs. They lost that game to Olsh this past week. And drawing Elwood City in the first round, with the winner then going on to play Steel Valley. So I think an Elwood City Steel Valley matchup would be compelling, but I do think I like Steel Valley's chances to go on a deep run here in the 2A playoffs.
As do I.
Yeah, if I had to pick right now, I would go with a Seton Steel Valley championship game.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine that it isn't going to be that.
Yeah. All right, and then finally in the 1A playoffs, where 16 teams make the playoffs, it's our only full 16-team bracket where there are no byes. And so Clairton and Fort Cherry getting the top 2 seeds, no surprise. Fort Cherry is the defending champions. Clairton was the runners-up last year. Clairton, I said that I would talk about this, so I will. And that somebody mentioned it in the chat. I was trying to go back and find who it was. I think it was Gary. So Clairton gave up 19 points to Amani Christian in week 0 and didn't give up a single point the rest of the season. No points given up to any 1A opponent, no points given up in conference play. And their defense scored 5 touchdowns this year. So their defense scored more points, 30, than they gave up, 19, the whole year. Like, that's incredible. Like,
that is the most incredible stat I've ever heard in high school football, is that their defense scored more points than what their defense allowed in a 10-game season. That's incredible.
Yeah, they have 9 shutouts. They gave up 19 to Amani Christian, who's the number 2 seed in 3A, and then nothing the whole rest of the year.
Yeah, that's just incredible.
Yes.
Well, just
All
incredible.
right, so let's talk about these teams. Fort Cherry, the two-time defending WPIAL champions. Coach Gary, friend of the show. Matt Seg, their incredible quarterback who was a Penn State commit, but is now kind of exploring some other options. But he's been running all over the place. He's been kind of nursing an injury for the last couple of weeks, so they haven't had him throw the ball at all. But he hasn't had to. Their line's been so good. And the thing that's so impressive about Fort Cherry every time I see them is that the way they play together as a team, it's a total team effort to block for their running game. It's not just Matt Seg in the running game. It's Eli Sylvania, it's Ryan Huey. They've got other good players that put things
It's
together.
the culture
And
of that is
it's
just pervasive.
yeah, it's the culture, and you've got everybody pitching in. You've got running backs and wide receivers and tight ends, everybody blocking and doing their part to help the offense click and help everything just go well
Yeah.
for them. So Fort Cherry, and the other thing about them is they're really good on defense. Like they're really good on defense. So Bishop Canavan, who is a really good team, just I mean hit a couple big plays against their defense, but pretty much just got stonewalled against Fort Cherry's defense for most of that game. So Fort Cherry, really good team, deserving of the number 1 seed as the two-time defending WPIAL champions. And I fully expect to see them back at Acrisure Stadium once again this year.
Yeah, I think everybody does.
Yep. Avella getting in as the number 16 seed. A great story for Avella. 6-4 overall record that the committee rewarded. They actually finished in a 3-way tie for 4th place in the Tri-County South Conference. And usually the WPIAL doesn't look too highly on the Tri-County South, but they rewarded Avella with that 6-4 overall record with the last wild card. So one of the smallest schools in the WPIAL, putting together a pretty good season in the Tri-County South and getting into the playoffs. So just a great story for Avella. Congratulations to the Eagles, and now they have to go play Fort Cherry.
Yeah,
Um,
right.
the one thing I will mention though about the 1A bracket, right, for all these small schools, I think the WPIAL did a really good job. I actually want to go back to the bracket here for a second. The WPIAL did a really good job of trying as best as they could to give geographically friendly matchups. So like Avella and
Uh-huh.
Fort Cherry are pretty close to each other in Washington County. Southside Beaver and Chartiers Houston, relatively close to each other, not too far away. Clairton and Monessen just up the Mon River from each other. In even California and Fraser, like not quite neighboring districts, but very close to each other on like the Greene County, Fayette County, Washington County
Hmm.
border there where they all come together. So, 4 matchups here in 1A that I think the committee did a pretty good job trying to be fan friendly of saying, hey, we're going to match you up against someone that's geographically close so your fans don't have to drive like an hour and a half away to see your team play.
Yeah, no, that is really kind of them, and I'd be interested to know whether they were cognizant of that as they put it together, because
Um,
they may have just it could have happened by accident, but it's hard to imagine that, but it could.
it could have, I think so. I think usually what they try and do is definitely number 1 is you want to get the top 8 seeds correct. So figuring out who the top 8 teams were, and this year they just took the top 2 teams in each conference and seeded them as
Yeah.
the top 8, which is totally fine. Um, and then from there, looking at 2 things, looking at both their seed order, um, avoiding conference rematches, which can, I think avoiding conference rematches is the more important thing that can kind of slide teams up or down um, uh, as you try and slot them in, which is also probably why you have a team like
Yeah,
a
one you just rank them 1 through 16. I mean,
yeah.
and
Well, you
just
rank them
play it
1 through
out.
16, and then if you need to kind of adjust them based on, to avoid a conference rematch, then that can also help try and getting teams geographically closer to each other
Yeah.
as well. So, all right, we already talked about Fort Cherry Novella. We'll talk about Leechburg next. Their running back, Timmy Andrassy, had a great season. He was on our Players of the Week list multiple times. He scored 25 total touchdowns for Leechburg, but they're coming off that upset loss to Greensburg Central Catholic, which I think did drop them down the bracket a bit. This is the fourth straight playoff appearance for Leechburg after they had a 30-year playoff drought. So, Leechburg has now put together a couple good seasons in a row. And congratulations to the Blue Devils getting back in the playoffs this year. And we'll see what they can do against the Neshannock team, which has played some very close games this year. Had a close loss to conference champ Laurel in week 9. They also pulled off a couple victories over some 2A opponents that they played in non-conference play. They've got a really good dual threat cornerback in Gino Mazzocco and a good running back in Anthony Eakin. So this is a Neshannock team that is going to be a really good matchup for Leechburg. I mean, this game's going to be played on the ground. It's going to be a run kind of game for both teams. But whoever can control the trenches is going to win this one. But both of these teams can put points on the board. And I think it sets up to be a back and forth affair with both teams just battling it out on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of an oxymoron that, they score a lot of points on the ground. But that's the case. I mean, these teams can just like uh, uh, get rocking and rolling and really get things in their momentum and just take off with it.
Yep, absolutely. All right, the number 4 seed is the Laurel Spartans, who are the Big 7 conference champions. They got the number 4 seed because they lost head-to-head to Bishop Canavan, who was a second-place team out of the Black Hills, but got the number 3 seed. So Laurel at number 4, their only loss was against Bishop Canavan. Laurel, who was traditionally a very run-heavy team, actually has a quarterback now, Lucas Santini, who set their school record for passing yards. So they can be multiple now. They can throw and run this year. They still have a very good running game, but this is a very good Laurel Spartans team, making their 6th consecutive playoff appearance, and we'll see what they can do as they get through the playoff bracket here. They will face a Jefferson Morgan team who was the conference champions last year, but lost games to both Bentworth and California. JM, the Rockets can score a ton of points. Deacon DeHoet, their star all-around do-it-all running back, wide receiver / player, scored a ton of touchdowns this year. I think it was like 28 total touchdowns for him. Yeah, 28 total touchdowns for him this season. So he's a guy that can score anytime he gets his hands on the ball, which should be a pretty good matchup, I think, against Laurel's defense, which is holding opponents to just like 9 points a game
Yeah.
against the Jefferson Morgan team that can really light up the scoreboard.
Yeah, you always like to see who's going to impose their will on in games like that.
Yep. Southside Beaver getting the number 5 seed after they came in second place behind Laurel. So a potential conference rematch in the quarterfinals if both of them win. Southside runs a triple option and has a number of different players that they plug into the backfield. So they've got like 5 or 6 guys with over 100 rushing yards on the season, and can kind of just go with whoever they want to at any point in time, and have been able to score with anyone. So Southside really good in that triple option run, especially at the 1A level, is really tough to stop. They will face Chartiers Houston, one of the best stories. We mentioned them earlier as having the most losses of any team since their last playoff win. So their last playoff win came in 2000. They've lost 12 playoff games since then. So they've gotten into the playoffs, just haven't been able to pull off the victory. They finished towards the bottom of their conference last year and won close games over Monessen and Cornell. Cornell, they beat in week 8 by 1 point, I think on the final play of the game. So Chartiers Houston getting into the playoffs. Congratulations to the Bucks turning things around there. Aaron Walsh, I think, is their quarterback's name. He had a really good season.
Wow.
But yeah, Char Houston getting in for the first time in a few years. So you like to see that too. You like to see those teams that haven't been in for a couple years get back into the playoffs and maybe try and mix it
Well,
up.
it just reinvigorates the program,
Yeah.
which is what you've got to have. You've got to have that winning in there, just to inject some of energy into the whole process.
Yep. I was right. It was Aaron Walsh. Threw for over 900 yards, ran for over 800 yards, had 26 total touchdowns between rushing and passing. So a nice dual threat option there.
Mm-hmm.
All right. The Clairton Bears, the number 2 seed in the 1A playoffs, made it to the WPIAL championship game last year where they lost to Fort Cherry on a crazy play in the final minute where Fort Cherry ran like a throwback pass. But, Clairton really clicking on all cylinders this year. Like we said, their defense has put up more points than they allowed, which is just an incredible statistic. And this year they've got a passing game. Last year, when they got into the playoffs, their quarterback Jeff Thompson was hurt, nursing an injury, so he was playing but wasn't throwing the ball a whole lot. Now Clairton's got Jeff Thompson who's able to throw the ball all over the yard, and their
It
defense
shows.
is loaded with talent. Brandon Murphy, the sophomore defensive end, has D1 offers already. And at the 1A level, when you've got a guy that's the size of Brandon Murphy, it's just he's playing like wide receiver for them too. Just to the talent that this team has, just going through Clairton's roster with everything they have on this team, I don't even know where to start. Like I could just start naming guys, and all these guys are incredibly talented athletes, D1 capable players. Terrace Wooding, who plays wide receiver and defensive back, Michael Ruffin, Dante Wright, who both play running back, wide receiver, anchor their defensive backfield. Dion Lovelace Pompey, who's a star linebacker and also their leading rusher. They've just got guys after guys after guys on this team. And that's not even to mention like the guys on their defensive front and what they've been able to do. So Clairton just outstanding overall. And it's going to be tough to score on them, let alone, come out and beat them. I think Fort Cherry's the only team that has a chance against them.
Well, look, in my mind, maybe the best two teams in 1A in the entire state are both in the WPIAL. I mean, you know, so,
It's possible. The other thing I'll say, I think you could put either of these two teams, Clairton or Fort Cherry, in 2A, and they could make the championship game.
sure. Yeah, it's hard to imagine that they wouldn't. They're that talent laden.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And um, you know, Clairton lost to Amani Christian, but has other big wins on their slate. Like I said, no points, no points given up to anyone since 8 shutouts overall. They had that forfeit against Shadyside Academy too. So
Incredible.
it just yeah, a totally dominant season from Clairton. They will face the Monessen Greyhounds, who got into the playoffs via the wild card because they beat Cornell in the final game of the season. Cornell did not get in, which was a little bit of a surprise, but Monessen beating Cornell. So they get one of the last wild card spots to get into the playoffs, 5th straight playoff appearance for the Monessen Greyhounds. So congratulations to them. We'll see if they can score against Clairton. Only one team has done it. All right,
Yeah,
the
that's
number
right.
7 seed, the Bentworth Bearcats, one of the best stories in the WPIAL this year. They almost pulled it off and won the conference title in the Tri-County South. They only lost by 1 point to California. I think it was an 8-7 game earlier this year. Bentworth's running back, Ben Hayes, led the WPIAL in rushing and scoring. He ran for 1,600 yards, 1,646 yards overall, 35 touchdowns for Ben Hayes on the season.
Wow, 35 touchdowns. That's big time.
35 touchdowns for Ben Hayes this year. So Bentworth, another
And
team,
he was he ever even on the top performers list?
a
I don't
couple
recall.
times.
See, was he?
Yeah, he was on there a couple times.
Okay.
But a lot of it was, Bentworth, other than California, blew out pretty much everyone they played. So
Yeah.
in his 35 touchdowns, a, a lot of it was, just 3 touchdowns, 4 touchdowns. He only had,
He didn't have that one breakout performance.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, he was just consistent week after week after week after week.
Mm-hmm.
I guess he did put up 6 touchdowns in week 8 and 5 touchdowns in week 6, but a lot of times it was those those 4 touchdown performances that joked about early in the show that I said, like, we've got guys scoring 4 touchdowns that I don't even put on the list because we've got guys scoring 6 or 7
Yeah.
touchdowns in a week. So,
Well,
um,
well, that was him.
yep. Yeah. So Ben Hayes, great season. Bentworth last year made the playoffs for the first time since 2014. So the first time in the six classification era. And now they came within a point of winning the conference title this year. So I think, just another great story. They only have one playoff win in their school history. Unfortunately, they got a really tough draw against a super talented Jeanette team that has a great dual threat quarterback in Kimon Brown and a wide receiver in Jace Powell, who's outstanding. So this is going to be a tough matchup for Bentworth. Jeanette is, they made a sort of surprising upset run to the semifinals last year, and now Jeanette right back in the mix again. Although the winner of this game is probably going to have to play Clairton, but Jeanette put together a really good season once again this year. Another team that had that one down year after they won the WPIAL title in 2020, had that really bad year in 2021, but have bounced back over the last few seasons.
Yeah, they had a bunch of players transfer
Yep.
out and everything else. So they've survived and prospered.
They have. And for a program as rich as Jeanette, you like to see teams like that be good because they're an incredibly rich program with all the tradition they have there at Jeanette. So it's good to see those teams be good and be competitive.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Bishop Canevin got the number 3 seed in the playoffs. They have a D1 caliber wide receiver and DeMar Olds on the outside, a talented running back in Meonte Mott, and some really good players on that defense. They beat Laurel head-to-head earlier this year, which is why they got the number 3 seed. Their only loss in conference play was against Fort Cherry. So Canevin, a threat to make a run here. A Canevin-Clairton semifinal would be a really good game if both teams get that far, which I think they probably will. Canevin has just put together, a solid season. And they beat Steel Valley earlier this year, which I think is another, feather in their cap. Not only did Canevin beat Laurel, but they beat Steel Valley, who wound up being a conference champion in 2A. So an impressive year for Bishop Canevin overall. They get the Greensburg Central Catholic Centurions, who won that game against Leechburg this past week that got them a wild card, got them into the playoffs. So GCC, I think the interesting story here is, do they move Samir Crosby back to wide receiver? Or do they keep him at quarterback after what he did this past week? So, a decision to be made for GCC.
That's a tough decision to have.
Yep. Yep. It is. But a kid that talented with that much athleticism, I would kind of lean towards, it's the playoffs. You want to put the ball in that kid's hands every play.
Right. And look, what the coach did and the team did is they put him in a position that he could be seen in the way that college coaches view him. And you have to give high school teams, I think, credit for doing that. But then there comes a time where you have to bring the team into account and
Yeah.
not the player. And I think that they probably already had that conversation when they did it last week to say, you know what, you're it for the duration, and not just say, hey, we're going to plug you in. I would find it highly unlikely that you're going to see him playing wide out as long as they're playing football the rest of the season.
Yeah. But I would say that is extremely likely. And then the number 6 seed is the California Trojans, the champions of the Tri-County South, 10th consecutive playoff appearance for California, the only Tri-County South team that made the playoffs every year of the 6 classification era. So congratulations to California. They are a ground and pound team that has a ton of running backs that they will plug in and just roll through you. California always has a strong offensive line, and they will just beat you up in the trenches and run the ball at you play after play after play after play, with Malachi Peak, Landon Abercrombie, Brandon Mayer, Logan Hartley, a whole bunch of other guys. They've got like 7 players that all have had over 100 yards rushing on the season.
Wow.
And it looks like 6 of them all average over 7 yards a carry. So California just stacked with talent in the backfield, and they're a very run-heavy team. And they will face the Fraser Commodores. What a great story! Fraser was languishing at the bottom of the Eastern Conference for the last few years, and have a gem of a running back in Derek Diamond who carried them to the postseason. Frazier, you know,
I love the name. It doesn't sound like a high school football player name, does it?
no, it doesn't. But Derek Diamond leading Frazier to the postseason, ran for over 1,400 yards and 16 touchdowns this year. Frazier, you know, I think they appeared on our upset list a few times, but because the last couple of years it had been them and Springdale down at the bottom of the
Yeah.
Eastern Conference, and then all of a sudden Frazier goes out, they beat Brentwood, they beat Greensburg Central Catholic, they beat Riverview, and it's like, oh my goodness, this Frazier team's like gonna finish fourth in the conference and like get a wild card. So
Yeah. No.
Frazier, congratulations, getting back into the postseason for the first time since 2017, and this will definitely be a run heavy matchup down in California between Fraser and Cal. So that
Wow.
is the end of our run through of all the playoff teams. But Bruce did mention this earlier that we do also have, quickly, we will run through our WPIAL Blitz statewide rankings
Yeah,
because we
right.
don't want to forget these, even though we've been on for almost 2 hours. But this
That's
is our
okay.
playoff
Well,
show.
yeah, but look, we've come close to, 11:30 a couple of times here, but I think that this is an important part of um, you know, the way that you've put this together and what have you. It basically combines the human element with the computer, and I think that this type of statewide ranking, quite honestly, could be more effective than some of the other rankings out there. So, but anyway, go ahead.
All right. So, yes, as Bruce mentioned, this is my WPIAL Blitz formula for the statewide rankings. Takes into account classification of opponents, margin of victory or defeat, and then also opponents' winning percentage, are kind of all the input factors. It does factor in out of state opponents as well. So all that is included. And somebody asked in the chat, how long does it take to make that slideshow? So full disclosure, I made the playoff one with all the helmets. I made one like the first year we did the show, and I just keep updating it. So a lot of that stuff is still in there that I don't
Yeah,
have to like
right.
change it out. So
It
it
just
really,
right, correct. Well, update the stats.
yeah, update the stats, change out a couple teams that didn't make the playoffs last year, but it doesn't take me all that long anymore to
It doesn't
update.
take as long as you might think.
Yeah. I put a lot of time in the first couple of years of this show, and now I'm just kind of rolling. I'm like that teacher in high school, back in the day when you had the overhead projectors, right?
Yeah,
Um,
right.
I'm like the teacher that like made a whole bunch of like the overhead slides with marker his first year as a teacher, and then 30 years later is still using the same faded
Same
out
lesson
yellow
plan
ones
there,
that,
huh?
yeah, yeah, the same slides to put on the overhead. So yeah. But let's start in 6A. Not a whole lot of movement here. It since it does take into account like the strength of opponents as well. You do see some teams that move up and down a little bit. Like I'll jump over to 5A. Like Pine Richland beat Shaler this week, and Shaler was 3-7. So like they played an opponent that wasn't as good, so that didn't help their rating number as much. Whereas like Peters Township beat Bethel Park, who was 6-4, so that bumped them up a little more. So playing better opponents does help you overall too. So overall, no one dropped out of the 6A rankings in the top 10. The formula does like those District 11 teams, I think, because
Yeah,
they all play
Nazareth is
each
the
other.
only thing that I would have any heartburn about, really, in the 6A side.
Yeah,
Everybody else is, I mean, that's just about dead on. I mean, to what you would think.
yeah.
Um,
And I would say the other thing I would say about these rankings is I don't know if I would definitively say like Easton is the number one team in the state, but I would say they're good for categorizing teams, right? If you
Sure.
say who are the top 10 teams in the state, I think this is pretty close to who the top 10 are.
Taking the
Objectively,
emotion out of it.
right. Objectively, you might rank them differently based on the eye test and things like that, and actually seeing them on the field. But I think it gets close to an approximation of who's performed the best because it's based on on-field results.
Yeah, and I guess the only thing, on the 5A rankings is Pine Richland, you know, being the number one team in the the PennLive rankings, but now they're kind of middle of the road in the WPIAL Blitz, rankings there. But Exeter falling out makes sense. I don't know if Westchester Ruston, uh, they're as good a choice as really anything there. Um, but there might be some opportunities for another team, 5A team to move in there. But I'll tell you what, nobody's talking really about much in the District 1 teams and that, especially on the 6A side, because ultimately they're going to flow. The bad part is that the statewide rankings you got here, the District 11 and the District 1 teams flow up through LaSalle College. So it's kind of like one team's going to take like 5 of the top 10 out.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Um, oh, the one other thing I should mention too, that when I made this rankings formula, one of the things I wanted to do was create a formula to be able to compare teams across classification. So like you see the rating numbers for the top teams in 5A are
Mm-hmm.
about equivalent to like, 7, 8, 9, 10 in 6A, which
Sure.
I think is pretty fair, right? You put those teams head to
Mm-hmm.
head, they probably would be competitive with each other.
Yeah, no, I think so. I'm sold on it, that's for sure. And I like, Hollidaysburg there. They, you know, uh, clearly they deserve to be in there. I think that they're in the state rankings as well through Penn Live and others. So yeah.
Yeah. Yep. And whoever wins the WPIAL is going to have a pretty tough test in 5A against probably Bishop McDevitt in the state semifinal just to get to the state
Yeah.
championship game.
Yeah, right.
And then probably face Roman Catholic in the state final. So there's going to be some really good matchups here later in the year as we get into the state brackets too.
Yeah, but there's certain situations where like one team's kind of standing in the way of a group of teams that is a prohibitive favorite.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, on to 4A, where we had some big shakeups in the 4A rankings this week,
Ooh,
with some teams losing. I think Southern Lehigh lost. They were the number one team last week.
yep.
So Pope
They
John
lost to
Paul,
Northwest Lehigh, the number one team in 3A.
right? Yes, which hurts them in my rankings because they lost to a lower classification team.
Right.
But I think the other thing to take note of here, right, that I mentioned these kind of comparable rankings. Southern Lehigh lost to Northwest Lehigh. Northwest Lehigh's rating of 114 would put them as the number 2 team in all of 4A. Avonworth's rating would put them as a top 10 team in 4A, which I think matches up with the results we've seen, right? Avonworth beat Aliquippa and Thomas Jefferson. So,
And that's great analysis because there's no other ranking, that puts that into play like you do with that rating there too,
mhm.
and I think that's just I think that statistical analysis like that and the way that it flows down and through, I think is dead on.
Mhm. So a lot of moving around in 4A, a couple teams falling out. Why I'm missing moving up into the rankings. No WPIAL teams rated in the 4A rankings, but I think that makes sense too, considering like a 7-3 McKeesport team is your number one seed. That all the WPIAL 4A teams lost at least 2 games this season. So there are a couple teams: Cardinal O'Hare from District 12, Bethlehem Catholic from District 11, that
Yeah,
played a bunch of higher classification teams, so I can understand why the formula liked them a little bit. But I do
I don't
understand
understand
though.
why Twin Valley isn't in the 4A ranking at 10-0, but maybe you might want to do some analysis on that.
Well, if you want to talk about the 3A stuff for a little bit, I will look up where Twin Valley is in the 4A
Yeah, Twin
rankings.
Valley. No, Northwest Lehigh. I tell you what, they're just on a collision course with Avonworth. Once again, I just don't see that really deviating. But in the same vein, Notre Dame Green Pond and Northwest Lehigh are on a collision course for a District 11 championship. It's great to see Berwick back in the fold as well. I mean, just a traditional powerhouse coming back, and whoever comes out between Amani and Avonworth, that is just going to be um, pretty crazy. And Wyomissing area, their only loss is to Twin Valley, who I was just talking about as kind of missing from the 4A that I'm a little surprised at.
Yeah, so Twin Valley is the number 13 team in 4A right now in my
Okay,
rankings. So
that's all right. Just a
yep,
question.
yep. So they're right around with they're right above Bonner Prendy and TJ and McKeesport.
Yeah, okay,
So
right.
that's kind of
It's not
where
like they're in bad company.
no, no. I mean, and that's the thing. I'm just showing the top 10, right? I have every team statewide ranked in this thing. I'm
Yeah,
showing the
right.
top 10 here on the show. Um, I I think, Avonworth and Northwestern Lehigh being at the top of the 3A rankings makes sense. Amani, Elizabeth Forward, both really good teams out of the WPIAL. So I think this makes a lot of sense, and we'll keep tabs on this too as the playoffs play through as well.
Yeah, right. Right. It starts to kind of equal out here as we go along. And oops, look who's on top again in 2A, Southern Columbia.
Yep.
Surprise, surprise. Schuylkill Haven. Um, a team that I've been on their bandwagon out of District 11, all year long. Really good team there. And but don't forget a couple teams that I like in these small schools. I like Williams Valley in 2A, Lackawanna Trail. I like, in 1A there. Bishop Guilfoyle, they've had a couple of stumbles this year. And then Line Mountain has just taken care of team after team in higher classifications, including Steel High this season. So I tell you what, they have taken on all comers and done very well. Line Mountain and obviously Schuylkill Haven, a couple of my favorites from out east here.
Yeah. And overall, I feel pretty good about these rankings also because there hasn't been a whole lot of movement. Like the teams that dropped out were, in that 10 to 15 range. The teams that moved up were in that 10 to 15 range. So not a whole lot of movement. These have 1A, 2A rankings week to week have been pretty stable the last couple weeks. So I feel pretty good about how they're rating the teams. Central Clarion and 2A went on that big run to reach the state finals last year. Karn City, I know out of District 9, they just had a big win
Yeah,
over Punxsutawney, I think, who is an undefeated 4A team
yeah,
a
yep.
couple weeks ago. Farrell out of District 10 just beat Erie Cathedral Prep,
Yes.
which what a big result that is for Farrell.
That
Uh, and then
right.
in
But I think the previous week the Cathedral Prep lost as well.
Yeah,
Uh,
Cathedral Prep's lost some games this year.
Yeah,
They've
they
lost a
right.
lot of games.
They are not the Cathedral Prep of old, that's for sure.
No, no, they are not. They're not the team that Bill Chirpak once referred to as that all-star team up north.
Yeah, right. Exactly. It's because it's not that, at least not now.
Right, right. And in 1A, the Whitfield teams showing up at the bottom of the list, but some of the other teams I'll mention, Bishop Guilfoyle out of Altoona, always a tough out in the state playoffs. They've been, they're the defending state champions, so I think they're well deserving of that ranking. Port Allegheny out of District 9 reached the state finals last year, absolutely throttled Fort Cherry in the
Yeah.
semifinals. So I'm fine with that ranking. The one I'm still a little surprised by is Westinghouse out of the Pittsburgh City League. They actually lost the City League championship game to University Prep. So they got knocked off by University Prep a couple weeks ago in regular season play, and then lost the Pittsburgh City League championship game to them. Now, University Prep is in a higher classification, so because there's those like pods in the state bracket, like
Sure.
Westinghouse still gets into the statewide bracket even though they didn't win the City League championship,
Uh-huh.
because they're a lower. The City League has teams from, like, there's only 6 teams in it, and they're all
Well,
different
right. It's
classifications,
very
and they all
similar
play.
to District 12 versus the Philadelphia Catholic League.
Right.
You can still lose the Philadelphia League championship, but still be District 12 champion. So, because it's
Hmm.
kind of an aggregate thing, regardless of they're all grouped together, regardless of classification in the Philadelphia Catholic League, but that's different in District 12.
Yeah. Yep. So I do think these rankings are probably fair. Although, personally, I'd like to see Fort Cherry and Clareton a little higher. But whoever comes out of the WPIAL, I think is gonna have a gonna have an interesting, path ahead of them in the statewide bracket, considering they're probably gonna have to play Port Allegheny or a pretty good Wilmington team out of District 10, in the state semifinals before even making it to the state championship. Where it'll be interesting to see how that eastern side of the bracket plays out, because like Bishop Guilfoyle from Altoona and Westinghouse from the Pittsburgh City League are technically on the eastern half of the bracket
Yeah,
over there with the Line Mountains, the Lackawanna Trails, and Belmont
sure.
Charter out of District 12.
Yeah. No, good stuff, Ian, as always.
All right. So if you've enjoyed
Phew.
listening to me talk for over 2 hours about high school football, you can check me out on the Steel City Blitz podcast, which airs on Thursday nights. We will talk about the Steelers. That's probably a little bit more of a adult show, I will say, because we do some swearing, a little bit of indulging in adult beverages, a lot of swearing after what the Steelers did this week, but so, some more four-letter words than are used on this show. So if you're a high school kid, don't watch it. If you're an adult, go ahead and tune in Thursday night at 10 o'clock
Yeah,
on
there's no
YouTube.
beeping there, no delay.
No, no delay. It is unedited and live, just like our show. So thanks everyone for tuning in. You obviously know where to find us on YouTube. Check us out on social media, and I will have breakdowns of all the playoff games happening this week on SteelCityBlitz.com.
Yeah, all right, Ian. I'll tell you what, thanks. Appreciate it. Hopefully the fans enjoyed the program. Also, Ian, just keep promoting it throughout. I think we've had probably as many people watch the show on demand, or more, than live. But that's just how people consume their video now. Is, I mean, how many times are you watching a show live, any television show live, other than maybe a live sporting event? I mean, it just doesn't happen anymore. So tell your friends about us, fans. I mean, all these great statistics that Ian puts together, and all the funny quips and whatever like that go on, and interruptions from the kids, and that all, I think that all adds in it. So great job, Ian. Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's a labor of love, but I love doing this. It's so much fun. And thanks to everyone for tuning in. Thanks to everyone in the chat. You guys were great tonight. Lots of good comments and questions. So, we'll be here doing the show Monday nights at 9:30 all the way through
I'm out on the
the
deck.
the
People,
state
yeah, haven't
championship.
commented about being out on the deck and freezing my butt off here for 2 hours. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, she's still awake. You have school in the morning.
That's right.
Yeah.
All
She
right.
took
Well,
a
we
late
better get
nap,
out of here
so
to get the kids put back to bed. So until next Monday at 9:30, I'm Bruce Badgley for my buddy Ian McMeans. Thanks for joining us on the WPIAL